All right, my friends, it is now time for the Soulful Psalms segment of Beacon of Truth. The Soulful Psalms is where we take one of the Psalms from the wisdom literature of the Old Testament, the book of sung praises, the same Psalms that we hear in each and every holy sacrifice of the Mass, and we connect that Psalm to your everyday lived experience. Well, today we're continuing our look at Psalm 107. So Psalm 107 is the first psalm in book 5 of the Psalms. And like many of the Psalms that begin this section of this part of book 5 is a historical psalm. So it's a very long psalm. And this kind of goes through a little bit of the history of salvation. The psalm is 43 verses long. And today we're going to be taking a look at verses 23 to 26. And it's going to sound very familiar to some of you, this particular section of Psalm 107. So this psalm has no prescript or superscript, so we don't know who wrote this psalm. We don't have any information about instrumentation or anything like that. But it started off in verse 1. Oh, give thanks to the Lord, for he is good, for his mercy endures forever. Which is, again, we've have that same line, that same verse in several other Psalms as well, talking about the merciful love of the Lord. And so we pick up at verse 23. So first of all, just to give a little bit context for the verses that we're going to be looking at today. It's thanking the Lord for his merciful love, offering sacrifice with songs of rejoicing, um, and how people cried out to the Lord in their need, and how the Lord heard their voice and rescued them from their distress. And so now we pick up in verse 23. And this is the part that's going to sound familiar to you. Some went down to the sea in ships, right? So they're talking about of course, there was a thriving trade, a trading route with ships going back and forth, trading goods and merchandise throughout the region there. So some went down to the sea in ships to trade on the mighty waters. These have seen the deeds of the Lord, the wonders he does in the deep. Right. So again, I love how some of these Psalms are very experiential. You know, it enters into the experience of the real people there, whether they're farmers and living in an agrarian society, and it's using imagery from farming, and nature around them, or in this case, they're talking about the trade and how they had seen and witnessed the power of God, because a lot of times there were storms, and the storms would batter the ships, and or sometimes they maybe see whales or some other creatures in the sea, and so they're recounting, as they're journeying on their journey through these trade routes, they're also journeying with God at the same time, which is a beautiful lesson for us. We cannot separate our lives from our relationship with God. It's not like we can have a life from Monday to Friday, but only think about God on Sunday. You know, no. Our relationship with God is woven into every aspect of our lived experience. Where we see God working in different parts of our lives. We use the talents and the gifts that we've been given to glorify and to honor God. So it's like a thread that's woven through the fabric of our life, this relationship of deepening love and communion and intimacy with the Lord, especially with the most blessed sacrament of the Eucharist. All right. So the wonders he does in the deep. For he spoke, now he's talking about the Lord here. He spoke and raised up the storm wind, tossing high the waves of the sea, that surged to heaven, then dropped to the depths. Their soul melted away in their distress. All right. And so here he's talking about, again, as they're sailing, of course, we've seen this in movies, and maybe some of you have even been on a cruise, and the ship hits a storm, and you know how the ship goes up and down over the swells and down again. Sometimes the ship is rocking from side to side. If you watch television, sometimes when you see those shows where they're trying to catch crab or salmon, or some other kind of tuna. Those ships where the different tuna ships are going out, and they bring the tuna in and they weigh it, and it's like a competition between them. So and sometimes you see that there's some pretty wild storms that are happening, and they have to work through the storm in order to get the reward, which is the tuna, whatever, or the crab, whatever they're catching. The same thing is true for us in life. There's going to be storms that happen in our life. There's going to be times where we feel that God is apart from us. God is away from us. No, we're not connecting with God. There's going to be times of trial and tribulation, whether it's in our marriage, whether it's in our prayer life, whether it's with kids, whether it's at work, or if you live in a religious community, struggling with other members of that community because, y'all don't have the same personality, right? Or whether, you're in leadership in the church and there's all kinds of personnel issues with priests or with finances or with something going on. There's going to be trials and tribulations. And so we should take comfort in the Lord. The Lord says, pick up your cross and follow me, right? So sometimes life gets burdensome. Sometimes it gets a little bit heavy. And we have to remember that the Lord also, because the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, he took on a human nature so that he could experience the things that we experience, except for sin, of course. But Jesus experienced, the ridicule of the scribes and the Pharisees who tried to kill him. He were ready to try to throw him off of the cliff, but he was able to escape them. Many times that they tried to trap him, tried to trap Jesus in a contradiction or tried to point out things that Jesus was doing, not following the law and things like that. So Jesus went through trials and tribulations and storms as well. And of course, the greatest was the suffering and death that he endured so that we could have life forever, to show us that not even death, which is the worst effect of sin, is greater than God's love. And so, yeah, the winds and the storms of life, we're going to encounter those. But it says their soul melted away. So when those things happen, sometimes we lose a little bit of perspective. We think, oh, you're so focused on the trial that's happening in your life, we get scared, we get nervous, which is a normal human reaction. But in the midst of that, we're also trying to figure out, well, what is God saying right now? How is God working in my life right now? And it's often difficult to see how God is working in your life through pain, right? Through pain and through suffering and through trial. It's hard to see God's hand. It's hard to see God's fingers working in our lives. It's hard to see the lesson that maybe the Lord is trying to teach us, whether it's patience, whether it's humility, whether it's trust. We have a hard time seeing that in the midst of pain, but God is with us. And why I say that this sounds familiar, remember, there's in the Gospels, it's recorded that the apostles were on the boat, and Jesus was asleep in the back of the boat. And what happened? The storm, when they were on the Sea of Galilee, the storm wind came up, and the ship was rocking, and what happened? They got scared. They had God on the boat with them, and they were still scared, right? So their experience is also our experience as well.
For more on the Psalms with Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers, check out Beacon of Truth weekdays at 4 p.m. Eastern on EWTN Radio and streaming everywhere you listen to podcasts.